Ooh, this is a good one. How to deal with imposter syndrome at work.
How do we handle rejections such as failed job interviews and experiences, if any?
And I was like, holy crap, can I even do this? And I was freaking out from time to time.
I once walked into an interview where the partner instantly commented on my North American accent and was kind of making snide remarks about the way that I spoke. Today, we're answering some career-related questions that we received from you guys on Instagram and in our comments section. If you're new here, my name is Lloyd.
I'm Em.
And we're two former corporate lawyers based out of Hong Kong. Starting off with the first question, which is how to politely explain to seniors when you don't have capacity to do certain tasks. So this is a regular thing. It's often pretty hard to tell a senior that you don't have enough capacity to do work that they ask you to do.
It's kind of a delicate situation because when you're junior, especially when you're super junior, you can feel pressure to say yes to as many things as possible. The thing to remember is that it's important to try and avoid overloading yourself because at the end of the day, it's the quality of your work that matters the most. So to answer the question, the first thing to do is to let your senior know what else you have on your plate, especially what's urgent. On top of that, make sure to be very clear about any clashes there may be between your existing work and the work that the senior wants to give you, and don't assume that they'll be able to tell themselves where the conflict is.
It's also important to let people know which other partners or seniors you're helping out with tasks so that if there are any conflicts with things that are urgent or things which need to be prioritized, they can work it out amongst themselves rather than putting you in the weird spot of having to figure out what to prioritize first. You definitely don't want to run the risk of taking on too much and disappointing one or both of your seniors by kind of not really getting your work done on time. So it's a lot better to just let people know where you're at and let them work it out amongst themselves. Moving on to the next question, which is, can you still become a lawyer if you graduate with a 2.2 honors or the equivalent, which is a GPA below 3.0? So this is one that we get asked quite regularly, and the short answer is yes, provided your grades are good enough to get into whatever bar exam or bar qualification that is relevant for your jurisdiction. So in many jurisdictions, if you do have a law degree and you're able to pass the bar exam, then in principle, there's nothing that would stop you from becoming a lawyer. But in places like Hong Kong, where the bar exam is actually administered through a course which is run by the 3 law schools in the city, the minimum threshold to become a lawyer is really just having grades high enough to actually get into that course and pass the bar exam.
If you're able to pass the bar exam, but you're having a hard time finding a job as a lawyer at a law firm as your first job out of law school, there are alternatives. A pretty common one we've seen is to start out working as a paralegal at a law firm or in the legal team of a company. We both know people who've taken this path and then later on got jobs as lawyers at law firms, whether it was the same law firm that they worked for or another law firm. While there's obviously no guarantee that things necessarily pan out this way, getting the paralegal experience is helpful and does also put you ahead of the curve if you get a job as a lawyer later on.
When you're actually working in a law firm in any capacity, what matters is the quality of the work that you're putting out as opposed to the grades that you got when you were in law school. So if you do start as a paralegal or in some other capacity and you're consistently doing a good job, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to get a job as a lawyer at that firm or somewhere else down the line.
So the next question is, how is your work-life balance when you're working as lawyers? To be honest, and this probably isn't surprising, sometimes it was decent and sometimes it was pretty crap. As to why that was the case, of course sometimes it was due to the demands of work. Naturally, if we're going through a quieter period at work, we have more free time, and if we're going through a busier period, we have less free time. But I do think our overall balance improved over time, at least relatively speaking, and that was because of better time management.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that a big part of it too was that over time, we really spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to have a better work-life balance and make time for friends and family, do things that we really cared about, and continue to learn outside of work. And that's actually part of the reason why we started this channel in the first place, because we wanted to share the things that we'd figured out for other people that were working busy jobs like us. That said, even though we did the absolute best we could, there were times when it was even hard to salvage a half hour here or there because work was just so all-encompassing and demanding. This is kind of the unfortunate reality of professional services, which we've talked about on this channel before, which is that you're always kind of subject to the needs of your clients, and therefore you don't have full control over your schedule. That being said, after incorporating some of the productivity and lifestyle habits that we talk about on this channel, our work-life balance did get better over time.
Ooh, this is a good one. How to deal with imposter syndrome at work. So I don't think there's going to be any single answer to this because the reason for one's imposter syndrome is going to be different from person to person. That being said, I think a good starting point is just recognizing it when that self-doubt starts creeping in, since you do have to recognize it in order to deal with it. For me, I think my imposter syndrome decreased as my experience increased. When I first started working, all I could focus on was everything I didn't know and all of the gaps in my knowledge. But over time, as I gained experience and I became more familiar with what I was doing, I could see myself learning and growing, and that kind of reinforced the idea that I could address any deficiencies by putting the time and work in. And I say deficiencies because all it really was just a lack of experience. Now, this isn't linear either. I would still feel that self-doubt whenever I faced big challenges, like when I ran my first big arbitration and I was like, holy crap, can I even do this? And I was freaking out from time to time. But in the end, overcoming those challenges and growing from them reinforced that same idea that I can always learn and get better.
It's also important to remember that whatever you're feeling, everybody goes through the same process as well. I realized more about my own growth as a lawyer when I started supervising other junior lawyers and realized kind of by seeing where they were at, how far I had really come in my career. As you get more senior, you start working on more challenging things, which makes sense, but as a result of that, it can sometimes feel like you're always behind or you're always struggling. So it's important to keep the perspective in check and remember that you're always growing on the job, even though it sometimes may not necessarily feel like it. So the next question is, how do we handle rejections such as failed job interviews and experiences, if any?
Oh, we have definitely had our fair share of those, whether it was internships, training contracts, or trying to move laterally between firms. To be honest, rejection always kind of stings to some degree, and it can feel frustrating and make you wonder why you weren't good enough, and that's normal. But to deal with it constructively, I think it first helps to remember that sometimes there may just be factors at play which are outside of your control. That can be budgetary concerns or internal politics or even internal miscommunication. I went to an interview once where there seemed to have been some kind of misunderstanding between HR and the partners about the kind of candidates they want to see. And basically, I didn't get the job because I didn't fit the language requirements, which the partners were actually very strict about, but HR seemed to think were flexible. Obviously, that was a bit frustrating and disappointing, but rather than staying upset about it, I just remembered that it wasn't something I had any control over and moved on.
On the same vein, in my case, I once walked into an interview where the partner instantly commented on my North American accent and seemed to kind of profile me off of my accent and was kind of making snide remarks about the way that I spoke. I could definitely tell through the way the guy spoke to me and the comments he was making that he just didn't like me, and I kind of walked away from the interview knowing that I wasn't going to get a job at that firm. And while it would be pretty easy for me in that circumstance to just take the excuse of, oh, the partner didn't like me and that's why I didn't get the job, I kind of chose to reflect on my own performance and figure out what I could have done better, notwithstanding the fact that the guy didn't like me. And when I really thought about it, I did realize that I could have had better commercial awareness, I could have understood what I was talking about a little bit more in terms of financial things, and working on those things ultimately did help me get a job at the firm that I was working at. So I guess the important thing is, even if there are factors outside of your control and it might feel like the world's against you sometimes, it is important to look internally and see what things you could do better and treat every failure as a learning exercise. So the next question deals with traineeship, and the question is whether there's any importance to the sequence of the 4 seat rotations and how one should pick. So this question kind of relates to the Hong Kong and UK model where lawyers come into a firm as trainee lawyers and do 4 seat rotations of 6 months each as part of their training contract. So a lot of people who enter law firms thinking they want to qualify into a transactional seat, such as finance or corporate, oftentimes will skip doing a litigation or other contentious seat. I personally always advise against this because I think doing litigation or doing another contentious seat, such as regulation, will really help you become a better lawyer. I was given this advice by a really good friend when I was still a student, and honestly the advice really rung true for me. Doing a litigation seat kind of helps you think about things from the perspective of when hits the fan, and that's kind of different from transactions where everyone's happy, everyone's just trying to get the deal done, and you're not really thinking about the disaster scenario. And in a way, having that perspective actually will help you become a better transactions lawyer because you kind of understand what things are like when things go bad and not only when things are going well. The other thing I would say in response to this is that for seats that you're thinking you might want to qualify into, try to put those for your 3rd or 4th seats because you'll have a little bit more experience at that time, so you'll be able to perform a bit better and have a higher likelihood of being asked back into that team.
And finally, the last question is, where can one best keep up to date with legal trends/current news? Legal research sites like Westlaw or Lexis have newsrooms covering legal updates by jurisdiction, so assuming that your firm has subscriptions to these sites, you can always use those. The one that I like best, which is actually free and just requires you to sign up, is Lexology. With Lexology, you can pick and choose which practice areas and jurisdictions you want to see updates for, and then those are collated and sent to your email. This is not sponsored, by the way, but hey, Lexology, if you happen to be watching, hit us up. We'd love to work with you.
If you have any other questions that you'd like to ask which aren't covered in this video, be sure to leave a comment with your question or reach out to us on our socials and we'll make sure to get back to you or address it in a future video.